So greetings and good evening. Thank you to everybody for coming out to our group this evening. This reading is brought to you by Strong Women, Strange Worlds, which is a group of authors supporting authors. Our mission is to elevate the voices of women and other underrepresented gender identity authors of science fiction, fantasy, and horror through events like our bi-monthly virtual QuickRead sessions. You can find out more about Strong Women, Strange Worlds in the handout we will have provided in the chat real soon now, and by visiting our website, a link to which will be added to the chat at https://strongwomenstrangeworlds.weebly.com. I'd also like to take a moment to thank all of those who made a tip jar donation. Thanks very much. We appreciate it so much. And we appreciate you. I'm your host today, Sara Smith, and you can find out more about me in the provided handout as well. Please note that the recording of this session by the audience is not allowed, and recording of electronic communications, including Zoom meetings and webinars, without permission is illegal. You're going to get a chance to see the recording and each of the individual recordings as soon as we get them up. Today we'll be featuring 6 authors: Joan Marie Verba, Kyoko M, Sara Stamey, Gabby Gilliam, Naching T, Kassa, and Sarah Jean Horwitz. Each author will have 8 minutes to read. Our first reader is Joan Marie Verba. Joan Marie Verba is an artistic author, publisher, and web developer with a bachelor's degree in physics. An experienced writer, she is the author of fiction and nonfiction books. She's a member of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America and the International Association of Media Tie-In Writers. Joan Marie, take it away.
Thank you. I'm reading today from Summoned by Dragons, which I expect to be published in August or September. The premise is that dragons have been coming from their world to Earth since the late 1800s to lay their eggs. The eggs hatch, the dragons grow up here, and then go to the dragon world about age 15. Rhea grew up with a dragon. The dragon, Zinnia, comes back and asks Rhea to help the dragons. They have been coming to Earth because an entity the dragons call the Terror has been eating their eggs. The dragons want Rhea's help to deal with the Terror. Rhea and her boyfriend Nick go to the dragon world to help. A veterinarian, Dan, wants to go with them, but Rhea and Nick want to check out the dragon world first to see if humans can live there. It turns out that humans can, but only if a dragon helps them, because a dragon world is filled with dangers. I'm starting the story when Rhea and Nick go back to Earth to get Dan. He's being paired with a dragon called Evan, a shy, awkward dragon who is nonetheless eager to help. They've gathered Dan's personal items and veterinary equipment and are ready for Zinnia to take them back to the dragon world. Rhea said, "One more thing. You're going to be paired with Evan." "Mother and father have talked to him," Zinnia said. "They told him to do as you say." "You can be sure of that," Rhea said. "He follows instructions to the letter. Zinnia's parents will intervene if he doesn't, but I don't doubt he'll be willing to cooperate." "He's actually very nervous about your arrival," Nick said, asking where to sit, what to say, how to look. "He wants to make the best possible impression." "We told him to simply sit to one side and wait for you to appear with us," Zinnia added. "I think I can handle that," Dan said. Dan, Rhea, and Nick took hold of one of Zinnia's back ridges. The campus disappeared. It seemed as if they were moving through fog. When the scene cleared, Dan saw sky and green grass. He let go of Zinnia and saw 3 dragons sitting together, one smaller than the other 2, and one Zinnia's size, sitting apart. Rhea put a hand on Dan's shoulder. "This is Dan, the veterinarian." She gestured to the dragons. "This is Moran, Zinnia's future mate. This is Kieran, Zinnia's dad, and Thalia, Zinnia's mom." Dan nodded at them. "Pleased to meet you." "We're happy to have you here," Thalia said. Rhea turned slightly and turned to the lone silvery dragon. "And this is Evan." Dan sized him up. His experience in animal behavior told him that Evan was probably nervous, as Nick had said. He smiled and stepped closer. Pleased to meet you, Evan. I'm Dan. We're going to be the best of friends. After I put my things in the house, we can take time to talk and get to know each other. Evan relaxed. Yes, I want to do that. Once everything was in place, Dan, Ray, and Nick stepped outside. Dan carried his tablet with him. Rhea turned to the dragons. It's about dinner time for us. She turned to Dan. Would you like to have supper with Nick and me? Thanks, but I'll take a rain check. I brought food with me. Dan gestured to Evan. I want to get acquainted with Evan here. Evan straightened up. Moran turned to the other dragons and then to Dan. We can stay here overnight. Dan faced him. Thanks, but Evan and I will be fine. I think you'll want us to stay overnight, Moran said, with a glance toward Evan. That's a very generous offer, but I'm sure you would prefer to sleep at your home, Dan said. Tonight we can stay here, Moran said. We stayed with Ray and Nick the first night they were here in case they needed something. Dan gestured to Evan. If I need something, I have Evan here. Moran moved to one side and gestured with his head. Come over here, human. Dan started walking in that direction. My name is Dan, and you can call me by my name. Come over here, Dan, Moran said. When Dan was a few feet away from his head, Moran added, I have been a dragon longer than you have, and I say you need us to stay overnight. Dan smiled. I've been a human longer than you have, and I say that we'll be fine. Kieran raised his head. If you two are done comparing your claws, I'd like to go home and settle down for the evening. They'll be fine, Moran. Thalia turned to Evan. Remember, Evan, you need to do what Dan says. Yes, I promise, Evan said. Zinnia reached out and put a hand on Moran's forearm. Time to go home, Moran. With one backward glance to Dan, Moran followed the other dragons as they walked away with Rhea and Nick. Once they were all out of sight, Dan rubbed his hands together and approached Evan. I have waited for years to meet a dragon just like you, Evan. Me? Yes, you. Would you do something for me? Yes, anything. He opened the patient app on the tablet he was holding and entered Evan's name. Thank you. I want to get more information about you. You don't have to answer my questions if you don't want to. And if anything I do makes you uncomfortable, I want you to tell me so that I can stop. But Thalia said to do what you asked, Evan said. Dan nodded. That's right. When I say that I want you to tell me if you don't like something that I'm asking or what I'm doing, that's doing what Thalia said. Evan paused again, seeming to consider. All right. Good. I wanted to ask if you were able to stand up on your hind legs with your wings spread out. I can do that. Can you hold that pose for a while? You won't fall over? No. Can you do it now? Yes. Evan leaned back, straightened his hind legs, and stood, unfolding his wings to their full length. Dan looked up for a few seconds before realizing he was gaping. Evan straightened his neck and held his head up high. Is this right? Yes. Wow. You are magnificent, Dan said. Evan opened his mouth and drew his lips back in what appeared to be a smile. I'm going to walk around you so that I can see everything, Dan said. Can you hold that pose for a while? Yes, I can. Dan walked slowly around Evan, taking note of limbs, wing attachments, and other anatomical characteristics. Now I'm skipping ahead because Dan takes measurements and listens to Evan's heart and lungs. Then he eats supper and goes to bed, and Evan sleeps nearby. We rejoin the story the next day, and we start out at Rhea and Nick's place. Moran stuck his head through the doorway as Rhea and Nick were eating breakfast. Are you going to check on your friend to see if he's still alive? Rhea put down her fork and picked up her phone. I'll send him a text. She paused while she entered the text. There, I sent him a message. It may take a minute or two for him to respond. She continued to eat. Her phone chimed soon afterwards. She picked it up again. He replied to say good morning with good morning. He's still alive. Nick turned to Moran. Were you expecting a different result? I say we still need to check on him. We will, Rhea said, when we finish breakfast. If you wait outside, we'll join you shortly. 4 dragons were waiting for them when Rhea and Nick walked outside. They strolled over to Dan's house. Dan was not in sight, but Evan was outside. When he spotted them, Evan rocked back and forth with excitement. Oh, you brought me the best human? He said I was magnificent. Moran turned to Zinnia and trilled something in the dragon language. Zinnia looked at him but did not respond. Dan came out of the house and faced them. Good morning. Nice to see everyone again. How was your evening? Nick asked. Fine, no problems. Evan swung his head toward the group. I'm going to find breakfast now. Evan flew away. Moran swung his head in Dan's direction. Did he sleep with you in your house? Yes. Probably wanted to make sure you didn't run off, Moran said. I'm not running off, Dan said. Moran swung his head in the direction of Evan's retreating form. Magnificent? Dan turned to him. Yes. No missing or broken scales. Wings are fully intact and working. He has the full use of all his limbs. Eyes and ears are clear. No missing or broken teeth. Gums in good shape. Heartbeat strong. Lungs strong. A dragon in excellent health and in full possession of his faculties. Moran told something to Zinnia again. That's the second time you said that, Moran, Dan said. Care to translate for us? Moran made a grumbling sound in his throat and lowered his head. Zinnia turned from Moran to Dan. He said that humans are easily impressed. Perhaps that's because dragons are impressive creatures, Dan said. That's the end of the reading, and I do have a giveaway. It's sort of a prequel to this, although it's a children's chapter book. So be sure and sign up for the giveaway if you feel like it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean Marie. Our second reader is Kyoko M.
Hi, everybody. How are you
Kyoko,
doing? Sorry, go ahead.
Kyoko M is the USA Today and Amazon best-selling author of the Black Parade urban fantasy series and the Of Cinder and Bone science fiction series. She is also a contributor to Black Panther Tales of Wakanda. Kyoko, over to you.
Thank you. I will be reading from my new release, which is going to be out in actually this weekend, which is July 22nd. I want to give everybody fair warning that apparently a thunderstorm decided that it wanted to show up right now. So hopefully I don't lose a signal or anything, but fair warning. I will be, I have an echo. I don't know who that's from. Just letting people know. So the plot of this book of Wings and Shadows is basically there is a tournament called the Wild Hunt. The Wild Hunt is where 4 different competitors have to catch the deadliest dragons in the US in order to win the tournament and become the permanent dragon hunters for the United States. So this is set in modern times and the dragons are basically real animals. So I will be reading an excerpt from that right now. Well, at least we picked a nice day. Charlie chuckled as he held his hand out for the camera woman to steady her as he, let me start my timer. Excuse me. There we go. Charlie chuckled as he held his hand out for the camera woman to steady her as she stepped onto the bay boat. She was a stocky Brazilian woman decked out in a fisherman's rain slicker, the camera rig on her shoulder already outfitted with waterproof plastic as well. Rain pounded down from the heavens, thick droplets splashing all over the marina, but that was normal for this time of year in Key West. After all, they were currently in hurricane season, which might have been why the storm dragon had been so active in the area. I'm Elena, she said, shaking his hand once before letting it go. The fellow with your eye in the sky is Kevin. We'll be coordinating to make sure that we get a good capture, but I'll stay out of your way as much as possible. Nice to meet you. I'm assuming you're well versed in boat safety. Absolutely. They tapped me for this specifically since I've shot a few documentaries about fishermen in the area, so we're good to go. Great. He pointed to one of the larger boats to their right. The Florida Department of Natural Resources is on standby to help us transport the storm dragon once caught. They can back us up if things get really ugly and we have to reassess how to catch it. The plan is for Penelope to spot it, then we'll chum the water to draw it closer and employ the netting. Elena saluted him. Got it. Yo-ho, a pirate's life for me and all that. Ha! In this kind of weather, it does kind of feel like we're in a Pirates of the Caribbean movie, doesn't it? Charlie took his spot by the helm and fired up the engine to pull out of the marina. Elena took a seat at the stern and began to film. Agent Nakamura, do you read me? Charlie said into the comlink. I've got you, Charlie, Yusuke replied, though it is a bit spotty on account of the bad weather. Tell me about it. I wish I had windshield wipers on his helmet. We're leaving the marina now. How's Noah? He's seen a medic for the bruised ribs. Should be headed for New Orleans shortly. Good. That midnight dragon was one tough customer. I'm glad he's all right. He glanced at the panel on his armored suit. We should reach open water in a bit, but it's likely going to be a long hunt. There's a lot of ground to cover, metaphorically speaking. Understood. Just be careful. We've already seen these creatures can throw quite the left curve at you when you least expect it. Amen to that. I'm going to check in with Penelope. Back in a few. Charlie switched channels. Penelope, this is Charlie, over. Gotcha, Charlie, the pilot replied. Having fun so far? Over. Oh, I'm having a ball. Lead the way. We're ready to rock and roll. Over. Great. The Dragon's last sighting was a little after 6 o'clock this morning. She read out the coordinates of where they were headed, and Charlie adjusted the boat accordingly to follow. Once they left the marina, he went to full throttle. The DNR boat followed at a safe distance. Most of the path had been cleared by the Coast Guard. Key West saw less visitors during this part of the year, so unlike Libby's hunt of the aquatic dart-backed worm, civilian interference was far less likely. Charlie, I've got a visual. Can you confirm? Over. She read the updated coordinates to him, and he adjusted his course, then slowed the boat. He then adjusted the HUD scope to zoom in as he spotted the shifting waves. The storm dragon had been circling a school of fish, borrowing some technique from the local sharks. It would stalk them at a different distance, then close in and attack from below, pushing the fish up to the surface where they would be easier to catch. Its dark blue scales blended in with the deeper seawater and made it harder to detect. It also shared traits with seabirds, being covered in plumage that allowed for buoyancy and protection against the salty waters and harsh winds during hurricane season. It had a long, narrow body that was 15 feet from snout to tail and webbed feet with sharp talons on each, its wings doubling as fins when it was fully submerged. Charlie whistled. There she blows. Sighting confirmed, Penelope. I'm going to start chumming the water, and I need you to keep an eye out for the other predators in the area, since it's bound to attract some that want a free meal. Over. Roger that, Charlie. Be careful. Over. Thanks. You too. Over. Charlie headed towards the stern where he had a cooler waiting, the bucket of frozen chum inside already prepared. Elena, we've got the dragon in view. Fantastic. She headed for the bow and took a look. Wow, que linda. You are all ready to go, Plankton? Charlie paused. Huh, Plankton. Cute. And yeah, let's see if we can get Moby Dick over here. He shut off the engine once they were several meters out and dropped the anchor. He picked the side of the boat facing the marine reptile and lowered the metal mesh chum bucket into the ocean. Though visibility was harder thanks to the storm, he could see bubbles and blood beginning to blossom out of the bucket and spread into the ocean water. They waited. The storm dragon had submerged but hadn't left the area. Charlie knew from experience that it wasn't always an instantaneous reaction. He resisted the urge to pace, as the vibrations it would cause in the hull might deter the dragon. Uh-oh, Penelope said over the channel. We've got incoming. I'm spotting something on radar headed your way to your starboard about 50 meters out. Over. Charlie went over to the right side of the boat and peered into the rainfall, muttering under his breath, please be a hammerhead. Please be a hammerhead. As it reached 20 meters away, Charlie could see a fin and a wake, giving him an idea of the species. Crap. Looks like a mako, at least 10 feet long. Things are about to get messy. Why? Elena asked. What's wrong? Not all sharks are aggressive, he told her as he pulled up the anchor and then turned the engine over. In fact, Key West has never had a fatal shark attack in its entire history, but mako sharks are among the aggressive ones, which means that we might have a confrontation here in a second. We need to be ready to boogie if that happens. A fight could capsize us. Sure enough, the storm dragon changed directions to head for the chum just as the mako made contact and began eating the bits of barracuda that had floated loose from the bucket. Charlie gave the boat a bit of gas to help it float along at a steady pace, then began working on laying the net while keeping a wary eye on the two approaching predators. The storm dragon circled behind the mako and then dashed towards it, aiming a bite at its caudal fin. The mako had anticipated as much and darted out of the way, then swung around to face its rival. Its powerful jaws snapped as it attempted to bite the right wing of the dragon when it swam past, missing by mere inches. The storm dragon dove out of sight beneath the boat, the water swirling behind its long, powerful tail. That can't be good, Elena remarked, practically reading Charlie's mind. He gave the boat more gas as he tried to strategically lay the nets in a wide semicircle around the area. The storm dragon proved them both right when it surged up from below and rammed the shark, causing it to flip upside down. The shark wriggled for less than a minute, but then went completely still on its back along the water's choppy surface. Charlie's eyes widened beneath the helmet. Holy hell, it's figured out tonic and mobility. Who, what, huh? Elena asked. If you flip a shark upside down, it enters a kind of trance and can be motionless for up to 15 minutes or so. It's how orcas sometimes catch and eat sharks. This dragon's not only smart, but definitely experienced. Both of them jumped as the storm dragon grabbed the motionless shark and bit a hole in its side. The water turned red with blood as it began tearing chunks off of its soft sides and belly. Elena swallowed hard as she watched. Yeesh, you said it, Charlie agreed. Nature don't play. He switched back to the comlink. Agent Nakamura, we may have a bit of a problem. Our storm dragon decided it wanted some mako shark instead of sushi for lunch. I'm working on laying the nets now, but I'm not sure how long it'll stay stationary. If it gets airborne, we might have trouble following it with this weather. The best bet might be to dart it and slow it down when it's distracted with the meal. Charlie winced. That was risky, but he knew he was running low on time. The tournament timer had already clocked him past the hour mark, so he had to finish his hunt now or it would hurt the team's average. Copy that. And that is the end of my reading. This book is actually going to be a part of my giveaway, so if you would like a free copy, please sign up for that. Thank you.
Oh boy, you certainly left us at a difficult place. Kyoko, thank you. Our third reader is Sara Stamey. Sara Stamey has published 6 novels. Her journeys include teaching scuba in the Caribbean, backpacking worldwide, operating a nuclear reactor, and owning a farm in Chile. She taught creative writing at WWU. She shares her pack and Pacific Northwest Salish seaside home with wild creatures and her hat, dog, and paleontologist husband, Thor Hansen. Sara, it's yours.
Right. Thank you. So I'm going to time myself here. Okay, the Ariadne connection is set in the near future Greek islands when there is a new pandemic and a geomagnetic reversal. And Saint Ariadne, as she's called, Demodocus, is a scientist, and she does not welcome her gift of somehow healing the new plague victims by laying on hands and not by science. She seems to be somehow channeling ancient healing powers connected to sacred sites in the Greek islands. To pursue the possible cure for the deadly plague, she must enlist the aid of a jaded American smuggler and stay one step ahead of hysterical pilgrims, eco-terrorists, Amazon women, pharmaceutical mercenaries, and religious fundamentalists, all out to claim her powers or kill her. So this scene is early on when she's trying to grapple with her situation. She stood on the terrace of her father's house, watching the wind shiver cat's paws over the translucent blue shallows at the foot of the cliff. Soldiers stood stiffly at attention near the stone parapet, faces carefully blank and gazes fixed past Ariadne as she turned from the view. Her uncle Stefanos strode past the line of soldiers, breeze ruffling his black slacks and his white silk shirt, and the sapphire family ring flashing. Beaky nose thrust upwards, he planted his feet and fixed a dark glare on Ariadne. You countermounted Constantine's orders for the laser. We need to complete our study. Your study, he snorted. Can you not simply accept the hand of God in this flame? Or do you wish to take over for the Lord himself and feed them all with loaves and fishes? Here are more for you. He swung around and waved a contemptuous hand at the peasant boy, perhaps 10 years old, and the crone in shabby black cowering on the terrace. They were still wet from the antiseptic shower the soldiers sprayed on any of the pilgrims picked up by the patrol boats. They had brought empty jugs in their leaking old caique, risking the closed border to beg Ariadne for her so-called holy water. She pulled her shoulders back, stepped past her uncle, and knelt beside the old woman, touching her arm. How long has he shown the signs? She reached to raise the boy's lowered face, livid with the scaly red scabs and the blisters, the collapsed nose and terminal stage nodules swelling around his eyes and mouth. As she touched the boy's face, the soldiers gasped. She had assured them that her researchers' new studies and the epidemiology showed the syndrome was not contagious, though it seemed to build on a formerly inactive presence of leprosy bacteria. The triggering mechanism remained elusive, But Ariadne was growing more certain it was connected to the increased electromagnetic pollution and Neuralink technology. The World Health Organization would not publish her lab's results without extensive corroboration. So people still feared contagion and put misguided faith in the isolation camps. The old woman was making the sign of Orthodox cross over her breast. For 3 months he has suffered the curse, blessed one. She sighed. We think he was hiding the rash before that. Ariadne nodded, took the boy's rigidly curled hands and examined the misshapen finger stubs, the proliferating skin masses turning his hands into lumpy mitts. She closed her eyes, darkness shuddering through her, as the boy's dread and heavy numbness invaded her own hands. She forced herself to maintain her contact, willing warmth and sunlight to reach him, but knowing that for this boy it was too late. Taking a deep breath, she steadied herself, rose and gestured toward the nearest soldiers. Please take them to the clinic. We will do what we can. The soldier stepped back away from the boy and one crossed himself. Farther down the line, a different soldier stepped forward in a glimmer of sunlight catching his shiny purple socks. Yanis, who always flashed her as happy grin when he passed by on his duties. He kissed his holy medallion. I will take them, Ariadne Santi. I am not afraid. The old woman scuttled forward on hands and knees to kiss Ariadne's feet, and Yanis had to pry her loose, guiding her with a limping boy toward the terrace steps. Ariadne blew out a breath and turned to see her uncle glimmering. You think what you're doing helps these people? Po, po, po. It's only a distraction. Stefanos stepped over to her, pushing his face close. Now listen. Constantine will be home from headquarters in a few days, and he expects to see some progress from his technicians on the laser weapon. Your pet healing experiments will just have to wait. He's indulged you so far, allowing time with the laser, but that is now finished. Constantine has completed security of the new facility and will relocate the laser there. For your safety, he will also relocate you to headquarters. She jolted back from him, from the image of the squat, ugly fortifications her father, the Tyrannos, had built at the port on Naxos. I can't live there. And what about the plague patients? They will be moved to a proper isolation camp. You may continue to receive the pilgrims under guard and give them your holy water. But this science project of yours has gotten out of hand. It's a waste of resources. But I'm paying for the research myself. Enough. You seem to forget it's you these pharmaceutical mercenaries are after. And you ought to thank the Lord and the Tyrannos, those cursed sons of the prophet, haven't made good on their new threats. You better put your heart into helping us build a strong nation that can protect you and your people. My heart, she cried despite herself. You'd like to own it, and my soul too. Weapons and power, that's all you men care about. A contemptuous thrust of her hand. Can't you see none of that will matter if we can't find a way to protect everyone from the electromagnetic pollution? This pandemic is only the first, but we're making progress here. And if Father would only let me visit additional sites to test, she bit at that. She was a prisoner here, if in a gilded cage, and soon to trade her island for a fortress of steel. Was it too late to escape? To test what? Her uncle was eyeing her close, suspicious. I swear, niece, if you're hiding something. She summoned the coolness of marble, made her face a stony mask. The wind plucked strands from her braid, whipping across her uncle's eyes. Christos! He paced again, then turned back to her, his lips twitching with a reluctant smile. Ariadne Mu, God in his infinite wisdom has seen fit to entrust such a sacred gift to a mere Koritsi, a mere girl. But don't forget, it's the men who shelter you, who make your visions work in the world. He strode off, followed by the rest of the soldiers. The wind whispered, sang, howled. Ariadne stared down at the sapphire sea, waves crashing against the rock cliff at the breakwater. Lithos, Athanatos, Keakinitos, their family motto from generations of traders and gem cutters to the new Tyrannos, eternal and unyielding stone. And I'm giving away 10 free ebooks at the end, so stick around. Thanks.
Sara, thank you. Well, our fourth reader is Gabby Gilliam. Gabby Gilliam lives in the DC metro area with her husband and son. Her poetry has most recently appeared in One Art, Plagued Human Quarterly, The Ekphrastic Review, Pure Slush, Deep Overstock, Vermilion, McQueen's Quinterly, and Anti-Heroin Chic. Go for it, Gabby.
Thank you. I am going to be reading from the middle of Chasing a Cure. So Bree and Tyler and Carly have made it to Moscow with a partial cure for a disease. And so far, it has managed to kill the husks that are created when somebody is infected by the parasite. But they don't know yet if it will work on someone who is sick and hasn't turned into a husk yet. I think Mr. Morgan needs some incentive for being so generous with his time and knowledge, Alexander said. Go and fetch it from the back room, would you? He asked Dr. Frankel. Her eyes widened, and it looked as though she would refute the command, but she quickly wiped her expression blank and nodded her acquiescence. She scuttled away amid Tyler's protestations that he would give his help willingly, and there was no need to offer further motive. Dr. Frankel returned from the back room and passed something to Alexander. My thanks, he said as he took it, keeping it purposefully hidden from our view. Dr. Frankel said nothing and retreated into the back room with a muttered excuse about needing to check on something. My tongue grew thick and heavy as I watched Alexander. I was certain whatever he was holding was not a pleasant treat, and I wanted to talk our way out of receiving whatever it was. I just couldn't find the words. A feeling started in the pit of my stomach and clawed its way up, threatening to become either a scream or a puddle of vomit on the floor. Alexander bent down and looked Carly in the eye. So quiet, Kotik, he said to her. Carly stared at him with wide, frightened eyes. Alexander reached out for her, and she cowered, pressing herself into Tyler's legs. Tyler placed his hands on her shoulders reassuringly, but I could see his own shoulders rigid with tension. Like a striking snake, Alexander brought his hidden hand forward and injected something into Carly's arm. She screamed. Tyler grabbed her and pulled her away from Alexander, but it was too late. Carly held her hand over the spot on her arm where the needle had plunged into her skin, tears running freely down her face. What did you just do? Tyler yelled. He stepped forward and glared at Alexander, looking down at the city leader, menacing intent radiating off him. I'd never seen Tyler angry like this. He was intimidating. His lanky height bulked up in his fury, but Alexander didn't even flinch. I ensured you'll give the lab your full attention, Alexander said. Your sister has been infected with the parasites, courtesy of our husk friend in the back, the one that's still alive. Now we shall see how effective your cure really is, yes? He smiled at Tyler, but there was no warmth in it. Tyler balled his hands into fists, and I thought he was going to punch Alexander in his traitorous face, but he kept his hands at his sides. Later, I would see the half-moon slices where his nails had dug into the flesh of his palms. How could you do this? Tyler asked, his voice seething with anger. She's just a child. Carly whimpered and pressed herself even further into his legs. He wrapped his arms around her, but kept his eyes fixed on Alexander, as if convinced the smaller man would attempt some other sinister act if Tyler turned his eyes away. We would have helped you without this, I said. My voice quavered and came out high and thin. Why would you do such a thing? I needed to be sure Mr. Morgan would devote himself to his work and give us full disclosure of his findings, Alexander said. I'm confident now that he will. Take Carly home, Tyler said, passing his sister to me. I knelt and wrapped Carly in my arms. She buried her face against my neck and clutched me desperately. Although she was too big, I picked her up. Her weight made my movements clunky and a bit off balance. What about you? I'll stay here, he said, still glaring at Alexander, who smiled like a child who just opened a box and found a lovable little puppy inside. I'll bring a cure home to her. In the meantime, please give her wormwood tea with honey. It will help. I nodded. I'd made the tea for many of my dad's customers. I'll need some wormwood, though. I hated to ask Alexander for assistance, but I didn't know how else to get what I needed. Do you know where I could find any? I asked him. Fresh or dried, he asked. I was surprised I had an option. Interesting that they kept a supply of fresh wormwood. The plant wasn't natural here, as far as I knew. Either will work. Whichever one can be procured fastest, I said. I will have someone bring it to your apartment, he said. I reached out to Tyler with one hand and squeezed his shoulder. Be careful, I said softly. He placed his hand on top of mine for a moment, then pulled away. I'll be there as soon as I can, he said. Take good care of her. Of course, I said, and I left him there, with the snake Alexander, and prayed the cure he brought home with him would work. And I'm going to be giving away a PDF copy of Chasing a Cure and the prequel to Chasing a Cure, Trouble in Tomsk.
Oh, thank you, Gabby. Our fifth reader is Naching Kassa, Naching T Kassa. Naching T Kassa is a wife, mother, and horror writer. She is in talent relations at Crystal Lake Publishing and is a proud member of the Horror Writers Association, Mystery Writers of America, and the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association. She is also a 2022 HWA Diversity Grant recipient. Go through it, Naching.
Thank you, Sarah. Sherlock Holmes has a new client. His name is Johnny Rossi, and this is his story. Mr. Marston believed my quest to be a foolish one. He counseled me against meeting this man, but I wouldn't be dissuaded. He was quite angry when I revealed my plans to him. And what did these plans involve? Holmes inquired. After my meeting with the professor, I saved my allowance for 3 months and built up a tidy sum. This I intended to give Lazarus Scratch in return for the Stradivarius. Knowing how my guardian felt about the situation, I stole off early Monday morning so that he could bar my departure. I took the train, expecting to hire a dog cart upon my arrival. To my great surprise, I found a carriage waiting for me. I arrived at Scratch's home around 8:30. The manor was a grand one with white walls, green shutters, and a flourishing rose trellis. 2 large willow trees flanked the door. I don't mind telling you, my heart sank when I saw it. It seemed Mr. Scratch had far more resources than I had given him credit for. My meager savings wouldn't buy the Stradivarius from him. I was sure of that. I would have to find a different way to acquire it. My first meeting with Mr. Scratch was a strange one and unnerved me greatly. He was an imposing man with hair bleached by the sun. It hung about his face, giving him an almost angelic appearance. I like you, Mr. Holmes. It seemed he knew things about me he shouldn't know. I had told no one of my plans to visit Camberley, and yet he expected me. A room painted in my favorite colors awaited me, and my favorite dish, pasta alla norma, was served for dinner. He knew my favorite wine, one I imbibe only on special occasions, and he even had a suit made for me, the one I am now wearing. As you observed, Mr. Holmes, it was at one time tailored to my exact measurements. When I asked him how he knew these things, he grinned, revealing a row of pointed white teeth. I have my secrets, Johnny, he replied. May I call you Johnny, or would Noki serve you better? The mention of my childhood name, the one used only by my father, chilled my blood. I didn't respond, but stared at him speechless. He laughed then. The sound did little to warm me. Dear boy, he said, do not take on so. I have ears and eyes all over the world. That is how I learned of you. It is also how I learned of your obsession. Come, I will show her to you. He led me from the dining room into a large room I can only describe as a library or study. Each shelf was filled with leather-bound tomes, jewels, cups fashioned from gold, and many other treasures. A rich Persian carpet covered the floor, and heavy black drapes covered the windows. Oil lamps lit the room, creating a tasteful balance between light and shadow. On the wall behind the African teakwood desk hung the Stradivarius. The glow from the nearby oil lamp flickered over it, was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Mr. Scratch crossed to the wall and took it in his hands. "Beautiful, isn't she?" he crooned. I reached out for the Stradivarius, desperate to touch the wood, to feel the strings under my fingers, and to clutch it beneath my chin. He held it just outside my reach, a smile playing across his lips. "I am sorry, Johnny. I cannot allow you to hold her. She is my prized possession, the highlight of my collection. I have owned her since she entered the world. I cannot suffer another to touch her." I nodded, the disappointment once again flooding my heart. I felt as though I were drowning in it. Mr. Scratch placed the violin beneath his chin, and I pulled the bow across the strings. The melodious sound filled me with a peace I had never known. When he finally ceased, I realized the midnight hour had come and gone. I licked my lips. My mouth had suddenly gone dry. Mr. Scratch turned and took hold of his arm. I took hold of his arm. "You would never part with it? Not for any price?" He turned and grinned at me over his shoulder. There was something fiendish in that smile. If I had been in my right mind, I would have let him go, would have fled the house. Unfortunately, I had already been bewitched. "There is a trust in my name," I said, "one I shall have access to in but a few days. It is a substantial fortune. Not only does it contain monies earned by me, it also contains the fortunes of both my parents." He shook his head. "It isn't enough." "Please, I will give you anything. I must have it. Name your price." He cocked his head to one side and stared at me for a long while. "I don't think you could pay it," he said at last, and ushered me from the room. For 2 days, I begged and cajoled Scratch for the Stradivarius, and for 2 days he rebuffed me. On the 3rd day, he forbade me from speaking of it again. If I did, he would have me banished from the house. That night, as I sat brooding in my room, a terrible plan formed within my mind. I had observed the library for the past few nights and noticed that no guard had been set outside the door nor in the room. What's more, the household, consisting of a butler and 3 maids, often turned in at 9 o'clock and didn't rouse until 5. The Stradivarius was unwatched during these hours, and no one might notice its disappearance during the night. I see by your expression, Dr. Watson, that you are shocked by my behavior. I have no excuse for my actions, though I assure you, I have suffered mightily for it. There is no taking back what I have done. I can only tell you of how I crept from the room, my ears straining for any sound, and made my way down the passage to the library. I shielded the candle I carried with one hand, afraid that its glow might alert those whose doors I passed. The hall seemed to go on forever, and I was quite relieved when I reached the door to the library undiscovered. The door opened on quiet hinges when I slipped inside. The room was lit by a single oil lamp. It illuminated the Stradivarius and nothing else. I approached it, my heart in my throat. I set the candlestick on the desk and reached up to retrieve the instrument from the wall. Only seconds lay between me and it, and then, to my utter horror, a sound, a voice behind me. I turned and found a shadow seated in a chair near the window. I knew at once to whom it belonged. "I am disappointed, Rossi," Scratch said. "I had such high hopes for you. It seems the temptation was too great." You can imagine my shame, gentlemen. I couldn't speak a word. I simply stood there like a chastened child. Scratch rose from his chair and approached me. When he came into the lamplight, he wore a strange expression on his face, as though he thought the situation a humorous one. "In my time, I have seen a great many desperate men," he said. "Men who would give all for the love of a woman, for the taste of power, for unbridled wealth. I have never seen a man who would give everything for perfection." He circled me as he spoke, and though his voice held no anger, I couldn't look him in the eye. "What would you give for it, Johnny?" said in a low tone. I glanced up and a bold voice declared, "Everything." He nodded. "Suppose we were to have a contest. If you win, I shall give you the Stradivarius. What will you give me should I win?" "Since you will not take my money, perhaps you will take my violin. I have it upstairs in my room." Scratch shook his head. No, that will not do. That will not do at all. My Stradivarius is one of a kind, and I have no use for another instrument." "What will you take as payment, then?" "You have only to name it, and it shall be yours." He nodded, and that strange grin spread over his face once more. "Very well, Signor Rossi. It shall be done. If I win, I take your soul." And that's the end of my reading. Thank you.
Oh my, my. Yes. Who was it said never make open-ended promises? Thank you, Naching. And that is the book out yet?
Yes.
Well, we'll find. Cool. We'll find out more about it. Okay. Our final reader is Sara Jean Horwitz. Sara Jean Horwitz grew up next door to a cemetery and down the street from an abandoned fairy tale theme park, which probably explains a lot. She is the author of several middle grade fantasy novels, and her newest book is The Demon Sword Asperides. Did I pronounce that correctly, Sara Jean? Sara Jean currently lives near Boston. And here we go with something from, we hope, The Demon Sword Asperides.
So I will be reading from my newest middle grade novel, which just came out about 2 weeks ago on the 11th. And I'm going to start in chapter 8 here. And what has basically just happened in the story is one of the most evil sorcerers of all time has just been resurrected from the dead. And we are going to meet the young sorceress who resurrected him. Chapter 8, Doors Meant to be Opened. The dark sorceress Cleoline was 18 years old, very good at magic, and very, very bored. 3 things most people would agree are a dangerous combination. Cleoline could happily brag that she'd been expelled from Madame Patrizia's boarding academy for magical girls of quality at the age of 13, only to be promptly accepted into the Order of Archivists instead. She hadn't known much about the archivists when she joined, mostly that they were sorcerers and also librarians. It turned out she'd had it all backward, and they were, in fact, mostly librarians with a little bit of sorcery thrown in. They hadn't taken kindly to her pyrotechnic experiments in their sacred forest. They cut the trees down for their fancy paper anyway, so she didn't see what the big deal was. Or her necromantic experiments with corpses from the Order's graveyard. Again, perfectly good bodies just sitting there. Or, as the head librarian put it, her general inclination toward practicing dark magic as opposed to filing it away alphabetically in the darkest corner she could find. Why did it have to be alphabetical if no one was ever going to see it? And so, Cleoline could unhappily say that she'd been chucked out of the Order of Archivists at the tender age of 16, at which point she chose to rent a flat in an aging magician's tower basement and do her best to ignore the rest of the civilized world. She could have trudged home to her parents, but they were sheep farmers, which was not only extremely boring, but Cleoline had the unjust misfortune of being born with a wool allergy. She had thrown herself into her studies on her own, continuing her experiments as best she could. It helped that her landlord, Waldo the Wise, was more than a little blind and deaf at his age, and so was less likely to notice when one of his chickens or grandchildren occasionally went missing to further the pursuit of magical discovery. The hidden portal she discovered and widened just a little on her way out of the Order that led straight to their top secret collections probably helped too. It was probably meant to be like an emergency exit in case the archives ever came in under attack, but in Cleo's opinion, why make a door if you didn't want anyone to use it? And yet, it had to be said, despite access to most of the world's magical knowledge, most of her experiments went nowhere. She was tired of burning off chunks of her long black hair while playing with fire. She had to be careful about things with fumes down there in the basement because she was inquisitive, not suicidal. Smuggling corpses down all those flights of stairs was exhausting, and most of the time, her revenants didn't do much more than twitch pathetically before launching themselves straight at her head, at which point she was forced to terminate the spell or risk her brains becoming zombie chow. Waldo the Wise's tower lacked a proper dungeon in which to lock up one's victims, which Cleoline felt was a major design flaw. All her past failures considered, it came as a bit of a shock when the walking, talking corpse of Amaral Veneer, the coolest, evilest sorcerer knight of all time, burst through her doorway, sending splinters and grave dirt flying every which way, and looking very much alive. Cleoline, Waldo's tremulous voice called from up the stairs. There's a young man here to see you. You, said Amaral, pointing one jagged, broken fingernail at her. His gaunt face was dirt-streaked, his gray eyes haunted-looking and rimmed with dark circles, his hair hanging in lank, greasy chunks. Cleoline didn't think she'd ever seen anyone more handsome. You're the one who raised me, Amaral said, his voice deep and hoarse. 300 years underground made one a little parched, Cleoline imagined. Keep it casual, Cleo, she reminded herself, trying to strike as nonchalant a pose as possible on her couch without getting stabbed by one of the random chunks of broken door. Guilty, she said with a little shrug. Amaral stared straight at her, breathing heavily. Then maybe it is you who can tell me, he said, his gray eyes locking on to her violet ones, freezing her to the spot with their intensity. She understood why hundreds of knights had followed him all those years ago. Anything, Cleo breathed. Amaral's face twisted in pain, his eyes struggling to shed tears that Cleoline suspected he could no longer make, not after she had ripped him from the jaws of death. Why do I feel so empty? That's it. I do have a giveaway going as well. I am giving away one hardcover copy of the Demon Sword Asperities, along with a reader's choice of a hardcover or softcover copy of any of my books of your choosing. And there are 3 other ones, so have at it. Thanks.
Sarah and Jean, that was so much fun. Thank you so much to everyone who came today.